and thanks for watching Viewpoint, Hexagon Safety, Infrastructure, and Geospatial Division vodcast series, and I'm your host, Jack Williams. The move toward next generation communications presents a lot of challenges and also a lot of opportunities for public safety. With regards to next generation 911, it allows the incorporation of voice, text, video, social media, photos to deliver more information to the public safety answering points. However, the majority of North America's 911 centers are using decades old technology, and this begs the question: where is next generation 911, 112, 000, you name it? Where is the adoption these days? And what do agencies really need to get fully on board and prepared? And in this episode, I'm speaking with Chris Carver, Sales Director for the Eastern U.S. at Hexagon Safety, Infrastructure, and Geospatial, about the state of NG 911 adoption, how public safety agencies can embrace next generation communications. And I should note that Chris is a former director of 911 and PSAP operations at NENA, as well as the former director of fire dispatch operations for FDNY. Welcome to Viewpoint, Chris.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Jack. And thanks for being willing to have this discussion on probably one of the most important topics facing not just 911 and not just 112, but public safety in general. Because as I think everyone watching this will know, or they're going to know shortly, if they don't already, nearly everything that every police, fire, and EMS agency in the United States and beyond does starts with a 911 call or a 112 call or some interaction between the public and a local emergency communications center. And NG 911 really revolutionizes that interaction in a variety of ways, some of which you hinted at in your opening.
Well, thanks, Chris. Well, before we get too deep into it, because I know you've got a lot of good wisdom to spread here, why don't you give us, myself and the audience, a high-level overview of what next generation 911 is all about, next generation call handling.
Sure.
It is a word, a buzzword used a lot, but what is it all about? What does it mean for me as a public safety agency? What kind of benefits can it bring? Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. And I'm going to try to boil this down as best I can. The challenges of how to speak to and how to describe next generation 911 have really been around for as long as the NG 911 effort has been underway, which is basically more than a decade. But what it really means is taking 911 and allowing it to leverage and use the smart part of your smartphone. It takes 911 away from legacy technology like camera trunks and selective routers, and allows 911 calls from the moment they're initiated, and it's not just calls anymore, we're actually going to call those incidents or events. It allows those interactions between the public reporting emergencies and the centers who process them to leverage new technology that's not just more modern, but supports new communications modalities such as text and video, but also allows 911 to be far more resilient, allowing 911 calls to be routed between different PSAPs during periods of high activity, or if a PSAP or emergency communications center is down because of a disaster or a technical failure. And it allows that system of systems of technology and operations to work together to dramatically enhance the ability of public safety to respond to and mitigate emergencies all around the world. It is the biggest game changer for 911 and 112 since the introduction of those three digits to dial for emergency services in the U.S. Of course, it's 911 in 1968 in Hexagon's home state of Alabama. But this really is a revolutionary period for public safety. And next generation simply means, as if you can say it simply, having 911 able to use the technology that we take for granted today, whether we're using an app or ordering a pizza or taking a video or shooting a text or any of the other things that our smartphones are capable of doing. Well, next generation 911 opens up that world for the most essential calls you can make from your device, which is those reporting an emergency and asking for help.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I get it. I like what you said about being able to use the smart part of your smartphone. You know, consumers have an expectation that, we use these mobile devices all day. Why isn't that ease and applicability of use, more readily available inside of our public safety answering points, communication centers? So, which leads me to my next question. What's been the challenge? I mean, obviously, I believe, what was it? There was a bill passed in the 2000s that sort of was the genesis of at least next generation 911 funding and initiatives in the U.S. We're in 2022. What's taken so long? What's the challenge with adopting some of these standards? And I say that, knowing that it's not as easy to take, life safety critical systems and then just snap your fingers and update them. But that does seem like a long period of time. Well, what do you think that is, Chris?
Well, unfortunately, as much as it's a long period of time, it's not without historical precedent. The United States was not the first country in the world to have three-digit dialing for emergency services. That was actually in the United Kingdom in the late 1930s. It took from then until 1968 for the United States to get 911 as a number. And then it took from 1968 until the mid 1980s for 911 to be congressionally designated America's emergency number. And even after that, there were still communities that until just recently still didn't have 911. So unfortunately, the adoption and advancement of technology inside public safety is historically something that takes a little bit of time. In the particular case of 911, and especially next generation 911, there are a couple of additional factors. One is the way 911 is governed. In the vast majority of cases, 911 is managed at the local or the regional level. And over the last, say, 15 years or so, because of the interest in NG 911 and because of the interest in allocating funding from wireless bills and landline bills previously to support 911 migration to new technologies, you've seen the introduction and really the emphasis on state level 911 efforts. So each state now has a state 911 coordinator. Most states are deploying 911 in its next generation format as a statewide effort. Well, what that requires is coordination between all of those counties and all those local municipalities inside each state that have a role to play in 911. And it's different everywhere. And when you're talking about modernizing a system that touches in some way every single resident of the United States and is therefore represented and managed at almost every government level in the United States, that's a whole lot of work to get things to move forward. That's a whole lot of effort and a whole lot of very serious collaboration and coordination and communication and connection that's required to really bring progress forth. And actually, as much as it sounds weird to say, the progress for NG 911 has actually been a little faster than some other major federal efforts or major national efforts. It's just that it kind of feels that way because the pace of our technology changing for our personal use is so much faster today than it ever was before. And it certainly is understandable why folks would feel like that pace of change has not kept up in the 911 world. Well, it's moving faster, just sort of at its proportional rate. And really, especially over the last couple of years, you're starting to see that pace of NG 911 migration really pick up steam. And there are going to be a couple things potentially happening in the next few years that are really going to drive it forward. And I can talk more about those here in a minute, Jack, if you like.
Sure. I'll definitely hit you up on that. So when it comes to, and I like that take, Chris. I mean, in reality, it's actually for the complexity involved, and God bless the state coordinator trying to get all these different agencies to work together and upgrade a technology framework and infrastructure at the same time. I'm sure that is a whole lot of work, as you said. So I guess it makes a little bit more sense even to myself. So, all right. So let's say I'm a CIO, I'm a director, I'm someone who's, you know, in charge of modernizing, digitally transforming my agency, my public safety operations. And I want to go down, I really want to start to be more active and go down that right path towards adopting next generation 911. Things like having the right architecture, design, and frameworks in place, governance. You mentioned funding. How can they get started? What's a good first step for those key decision makers to get started when adopting next generation 911?
The absolute most important thing that they need to make sure they are doing is that they are engaged with their state NG 911 authorities. They need to make sure that they are part of the conversation. This is, as I said, one of the most transformative times in public safety history, not just the 911 side. This impacts police, fire, and EMS agencies as well. And, we were all just, many members of the Hexagon team were just in attendance at the APCO conference in Anaheim, California. And we had a great time, in engaging with and learning from our existing customers, potential future customers, and other folks from the 911 world and the public safety world. But it's also a little bit sad, to be honest, that out of the millions of people whom next generation 911 will touch, out of the millions of field responders and local leaders and community leaders who really depend on 911, it's only a couple thousand folks or a few thousand folks that attend one of the biggest conferences in this industry. And it's the same thing that happened, with the recent NENA conference in Louisville, Kentucky. So the very first thing that must happen is that CIOs and others who are engaged in these conversations have got to get engaged with the organizations that are leading them. The fortunate thing is that there are standards in place. There's already work involved. There's already work completed. And there's a roadmap on how we get from where we are today to a fully next generation 911 future. Those conversations have been ongoing for about the last 12 to 13 years, led by some visionary developers and committee members at NENA on volunteer staffs who got together and decided to create this roadmap. And then later on, that work has been supported by other 911 and public safety associations as well, the National 911 Program Office, and a variety of other groups. Well, there's a lot of stuff already under the bridge. There's a lot of water already under the bridge. So it's very important for those involved in these efforts to get up to speed, to engage with their local organizations, their local state chapters of NENA and APCO, and engage with their state 911 office, their state 911 coordinator, possibly NASNA, the National Association of State 911 Administrators, and the National 911 Program Office to avail themselves of the resources that are out there so that they can come up to speed and then be a part of the next step of decision, the next step of advocacy, for example, for state laws regarding funding. How much funding is going to come off of a wireless bill, for example? How much of that funding is going to go to what purpose? What operational and training standards are going to be created to apply to 911? So all of those conversations require engagement and require awareness on the part of those who depend on the system and those who actually are responsible for the system and their local communities. And that collaborative effort is what got us to 911 in the first place. And it is even more essential to shape what next generation 911 will look like in the future. So the first step, get informed. Second step, get involved. And then the third step is continuous, and that's stay engaged.
Thanks, Chris. And so that, obviously there's some good resources out there. Get involved, get informed, look at things like NENA, look at things like APCO, get in touch with your state coordinator, even the national level. Talk to these organizations. I've been to these conferences along with yourself, Chris. There's a lot of good conversations and information and roadmaps about how to get there, and lean on that community and continuously learn. Very good advice. Here's something interesting I want to mention. We always talk about next generation 911, and to a layman, they might just think, well, that's just the ability to bring in, video from your phone, text data from your phone, photos from your phone, and push that to the public safety answering point. But what's a big part of the next generation call handling story is how data and interoperability have become a key part of the plan. I feel like it's often overlooked because there's probably just as much, even more potential when it comes to interoperability between neighboring agencies, between different agencies statewide. And so that part is very exciting, beyond just the, what you initially think of with, receiving social, photo, video, text inside the call center. That data interoperability and system interoperability between agencies. How have you seen those two elements of the next generation 911 story? How have you seen those evolve, and what are some of those key benefits of NG 911 that apply more to the interoperability and data sharing aspects?
So, if I may, I'll use a metaphor to explain this. I will date myself and say I'm old enough to remember when not every car had power windows and not every car had air conditioning. Well, text and video to 911, those are the power windows and the air conditioning. Those are really the options and the features that are now going to be standard. The actual call itself, or the incident itself, because it's going to be so much more than a call, well, that's the car itself. So we're moving forward the car. Next generation, well, that's the highway the car is driving on. Next generation 911 allows all kinds of possibilities about destinations, speed, amount of capacity, and all these other things that really are so much more than just the power windows or the air conditioning that might be an option now standard on the car or the call or the event or the incident that you're now processing. Truly, we have just experienced, and quite frankly are still experiencing, the greatest case study for next generation 911 that humankind could have ever imagined. And that's the pandemic. Allow me to explain. We saw throughout the pandemic multiple serious challenges to 911 operations that we had never seen happen universally at the same time to the entire community of 911. Case in point number one, agencies that were not able to maintain operations because they became, their staff became COVID victims and their staff could not be at work. And not only did they then have a sick out or a sick event where people could not report to work, they had a center that needed to be cleaned, that needed to be disinfected so that other employees that were not sick would not get sick. So you had a degradation in the facility ability of 911. We no longer had the same level of facility. When we did get the facility back up, we didn't have the number of people that possibly were required to answer calls, that were required to do the work associated with dispatching. That, of course, is so much more than just answering a phone. It's answering phone calls, it's answering automatic alarms, but it's also coordinating resources, dispatching those calls for assistance, and tracking what happens at those events and responding to additional requests and doing so much more. So all of those functions become difficult when you don't have the facility, and especially difficult when you don't have the people. Then we had increases in incident volume as the EMS side of the equation began to take hold. And you saw certain communities, especially those with large numbers of high-risk patients, dramatically see unbelievable increases in incident volume, to the point that, for example, you saw regional mutual aid EMS task forces respond into certain large communities in the United States, New York City being probably the most famous example. So you had all these different stressors that really fell onto the 911 system at one time. Well, next generation 911, by allowing you to share information, to share events, to reroute incidents, allows you to manage those peaks of activity or those losses of physical capability in ways that really we're not able to now. Yes, you can set up a reroute function inside a 911 center to say, if my CPE equipment, if my customer premise equipment for 911 goes down, I can route these calls to my neighbor PSAP. But what are we not able to do then? You may not be able to actually dispatch the incident back to the responders who need to respond. You may not be able to get all of the right data, both in your backup center and back to those responders. You may not be able to have a seamless operational picture of your region and understand when you have, say, for example, one particular event, say a major disaster that has overwhelmed the 911 center with volume. Well, all of those things and more, because we're transitioning from, in essence, a technological gravel road to a technological superhighway that can support significantly more connections and interconnections in the 911 system, allows us to mitigate both the planned events, say, for example, a fair or something like that, where we know we're going to be really busy because we have a lot of folks in town that are not normally there, but also the unplanned events, things like your storms, things like your natural disasters, well, or things, quite frankly, like a pandemic. Next Generation 911 allows us to meet those challenges in new ways that not only offer, and this is really the thing I think so often we talk about, it's great to have the technology, it's great to have text and video and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, what 911 is about is answering every call, every time, and getting people help when they need it. And Next Generation 911 revolutionizes the ability of 911 centers and emergency communication centers and 911 professionals all around the United States, in Canada, and other places where Next Generation is being implemented. It allows them to do their jobs more effectively, which leads us to safer communities and more successful public safety organizations.
Excellent. So, Chris, please spend a couple minutes maybe talking about how Hexagon On Call offers a very comprehensive portfolio of next generation solutions that help to advance the overall adoption of next generation 911 for our customers. Can you elaborate a little bit on what we're doing here at Hexagon?
Sure. So several years ago, I think we can trace the origins of our on-call suite back 5 years. Hexagon committed itself to being a future-ready vendor, future-ready partner with public safety by the system architecture of the way on-call is designed, by its ability to be easily configured to adapt to changing requirements, by its ability to easily interconnect with new technologies from third-party vendors, and by its ability to be deployed in the cloud, hosted in the cloud on a Microsoft Azure cloud. Those factors all contribute to a resiliency and an adaptability to a next generation environment that really, quite frankly, is unique in the industry. And let me give an example, actually, two different things that really relate. One is the ease of connecting Hexagon's on-call product to third-party vendors. You know, one of the things that never happened 20 years ago in 911, or almost 30 when I started, you didn't have to worry or even think about additional companies that were out there trying to solve 911 problems and plug that into 911 and offering a toolkit for 911 centers to get better results. It was 911 and that was it. Well, through the evolution of 911, we now have vendors and we now have other companies that are able to leverage the same technology that NG911 will ultimately leverage to help solve problems, to help locate callers. For example, Rapid SOS and the work they do, What3Words and the work they do, or our partners that solve additional data problems, that provide information for emergency response that otherwise would not have been available. Companies like ShotSpotter, companies like Flow MSP, and others. So all of this sort of creates, we've evolved 911 from a number to an ecosystem. And by doing that, and by Hexagon supporting that type of environment, we actually allow not just a more robust and more functional and more interconnected and more resilient use and deployment of CAD and records and analytics and our mobile products, but we also allow our partners and our customers to work together to leverage all the advantages of that ecosystem, not just Next Generation 911, which is terribly important and being able to support the data associated with events. Because, just to get off on a little bit of a tangent, so much of 911 of the future isn't going to be a phone call at all. It's going to be your smart device deciding that your parameters for your heart have now indicated that you need an ambulance for a heart attack that you may not even know you're having. It may be your home alarm system connected through a next generation 911 network to determine that you probably have a fire in your basement, maybe long before you, as you're sleeping in your upstairs bedroom, have realized it. Maybe it's a smart sensor in a traffic camera, realizing that there's been an auto accident inside a certain stretch of highway that meets the criteria for an emergency services dispatch. And then a smart CAD system taking the additional information from OnStar, for example, saying there's been a crash detected in a vehicle in that same stretch, creating a new algorithm that indicates not only do we need the police department to respond, but we need fire and EMS to respond as well, because it's likely there's an extrication required of a patient in that auto accident. So Hexagon On Call, through partnership with other vendors, but also by developing itself as a resilient, adaptable, expandable, configurable platform, well, it really creates an entire ecosystem of service that not just works better for agencies today, but also sets you up to succeed in whatever your future next generation 911 environment looks like in your particular local community, state, or region.
Very informative, Chris. And to build off your metaphor that you used earlier, would you say it's fair that Hexagon On Calls that on ramp to that next generation highway? I mean, because it's really about getting into that ecosystem, being able to digitally transform, share data, operate in new ways, new workflows. Hexagon On Call, along with our partnerships, our new architecture that's ready for next generation technologies and operations, our ability to quickly integrate, that flexibility to work with our partners and work with others to share information on that next generation 911 highway. I would say maybe On Call's that on ramp to getting there. So anyways, you could tell me I'm crazy.
No, actually, I like that. I always love a new metaphor. That's good. That's going to go up on my metaphor wall. Anyone that knows me knows I speak in metaphors and analogies almost constantly. So no, I'll use that. And here's the other thing too, that I just want to build off of that actually. And I cannot overemphasize this. We have a device today that every one of us consider really basically be another appendage. It's like an arm or a leg or a foot. That device didn't exist 20 years ago. So when you're evaluating what system you want to have as the core of your next generation 911 public safety environment, your ecosystem, it's not just about what we know is happening today. It's about what's going to happen in the future. It's about partnering with vendors, whether we're talking about CAD or records or your phone vendors or anybody else inside this public safety world. It's about partnering with someone that's going to stand next to you and beside you as the next version of the thing we don't even know exists today becomes something we cannot live without. And that preparation, that planning, that connection, that ability to meet the needs of the future that are seen and unseen, well, that's a very powerful thing. And thankfully, I think we've established ourselves and continue to work to earn the trust of agencies that look at it that way, that see the future as something that's going to have a variety of challenges and is going to require a true partnership with their vendor community to ensure that they can meet those challenges.
Excellent. A great point. And man, you got me on the metaphor run. I'm thinking of like 10 years ago, who would have thought there'd be self-driving cars on the interstate? So, I mean, you've got to build that infrastructure to prepare for those things that we don't know yet. So I love it, Chris. Hey, before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with myself and the audience before we end it?
Sure. I just want to reiterate something I said before. So much of the future of 911 and public safety is determined by volunteers engaging and developing standards, attending conferences, attending meetings, sharing their insight, their input, and their experience to help make this better. This is such a transformative period, and it demands that all of us who care about the results, who care about the success of our organizations, who care about the success of the personnel that maybe we lead or supervise or manage inside our organizations, and who care about our communities, this is the time to get involved. This is the time to get on the websites. This is the time to start reading. This is the time to go out and get industry certifications. This is the time to go to some training classes and learn about it. It is a wonderful opportunity for you to share as a public safety professional your experience and your insight and your wisdom and your knowledge to help make this better. Because one thing that the future of 911 is, next generation and beyond, is a collaboration. And when we collaborate together, whether that's customer and vendor, whether that's customers, and a couple of vendors and a whole bunch of other folks writing standards, whether that's all attending a conference and learning together about these new things that are coming, when we collaborate together, we create a better future. That's something we are proud to do at Hexagon. That's something we see as our mission. And I encourage everyone watching this and everyone involved in public safety, whether you're a resident of a community that's looking at next generation 911, whether you're a firefighter or paramedic or police officer who depends on public safety technology to do your job, or whether you're a 911 professional at any rank or role or level of responsibility who does this every day. Whatever your role, there is a need for your voice to be heard as we collectively, collaboratively create the future of 911. And as we bring next generation 911 more and more to a reality in communities all around the United States. So I extend that as an invitation. Please engage. Please have the conversations. Please take the time to learn, because it's going to affect us all, and it will affect us all in better ways the more people who are a part of that process.
Excellent, Chris. And I want to say a big thank you to you. You're extremely articulate, very informative, very well spoken. I learned a lot today. I hope the audience learned a lot today. Just excellent job, Chris. And, just, to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, life is a highway, baby. You got to ride it all night long. So, but anyways, sincere thank you. And I appreciate you spending the time, and I look forward to having you on a future vodcast episode. And for everyone else, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to Viewpoint. For more great stories, video content, please visit hexagon.com. Thank you.